Welcome to today's webinar presented by Software Technology Group. Our commitment at STG is to facilitate the transformation of businesses and technology organizations through innovation and optimization. We are excited to have you as part of our audience. Our goal for this webinar is to provide valuable insights and ignite ideas that can benefit your organization. Thank you once again for joining us.
Hello, my name is Mel Tingey. I am the Chief Technology and Strategy Officer for Software Technology Group. We're a consulting firm located in Salt Lake City, Utah, serving clients all throughout the United States. For today's webinar, we have Ray Hunter with us. He is our mobile solution architect, among other things. And just by way of introduction, Ray also is a principal engineer for Vivint Home Security, leading their mobile development, both iOS and Android. So what more can you tell us about yourself before we jump in, Ray? I'd love to introduce yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Mel. Great to be here. So about myself, I've been doing mobile development since 2008. Been working Android mainly and then iOS, throughout that time too as well, but primarily focusing on Android right now. And then, of course, working in other areas too as well.
That's awesome. Well, our mobile practice at STG is very strong. Definitely with your leadership and others within the company, we do a lot of mobile development. I'm involved right now with a project that is solely a mobile product, and it's been really it's just been very comforting having the level of expertise within STG to lead this effort. So today on the topic of mobile, we're going to start with some trends that are happening. Obviously, mobile development really got underway when Apple launched the iPhone. It just continues to move forward at a very aggressive pace. The ability to the features, all the different things that you can do. So we're going to get into, quite a few details here, but to start with, why don't you kind of walk through, some of the trends that we're seeing right now in mobile development?
Yeah, for sure. So a lot of the trends that we're seeing are not new trends. A lot of them are old. They've been around for a few years. The big focus recently has been, Internet of Things. That's been around for a while. That's still continuing. So we're starting to see more and more integration with IoT devices. However, AI, with its popularity and what it's doing, we're starting to see more AI on devices. We're trying to actually use AI and stay on mobile devices. So currently right now, most of the stuff that we're seeing is obviously reaching back into back-end systems, but the focus now is how do we get AI to run and not leave devices, right? To be 100% on the device and handle those capabilities there. Other things that are really popular right now coming out, you're seeing a lot more foldable devices. Those are coming out. We're starting to see those more and more. Obviously, wearables, everyone's familiar with Apple smartwatches. Yeah. Android has some watches coming out too as well. So you're seeing that this year. So a lot more development, fitness trackers becoming very popular, those types of, technologies. Obviously getting into more e-commerce, more wallets and payments on mobile devices. A lot more people are starting to do that. You're seeing AR, VR, that's still playing a pivotal role there. Chat bots are starting to become more popular on mobile devices. And then some other things too as well. Security is a big issue right now with mobile devices too, maintaining that security. So those are just some things that we're seeing for 2024.
Very cool. It's interesting in the space of AI. I don't think a week goes by that we don't have somebody, potential client reaching out to us, asking questions around, AI topics and whatnot. When you say having AI on the device, does that mean the entire AI model is there, or is it like what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do is have more very, very small, very finite models on devices that can handle, user interaction, user questions. So we are trying to do that and then run it all there. Google's really starting to step up with Gemini, starting to focus on that. There's some other, Apple will be coming out with some stuff here pretty quick. We'll probably see that in the near future. Those are models that will be very, very small and self-contained on mobile device.
Very cool. And then you mentioned the AR, VR space. Give us some examples of what you're seeing in the, obviously Apple just released their VR headset.
Yeah.
But in relation to mobile, I mean, kind of talk through what are you seeing in that space?
Yeah, so same thing. They're starting to use more mobile devices with those types of headsets. We're starting to see the capabilities that you can use your phone for AR, augmented reality. So you can start to see things. For example, if you want to look at, since I work with Vivint, you want to see some cameras in a certain location. You can, obviously have that capability. Furniture, if you want to move it around, you can look to see where furniture might be. So using your mobile device to help, with that type of augmented reality. And then, of course, VR, there's some headset integrations there.
Very cool. Yeah, in the augmented reality, I did a project a few years ago where, and you're seeing this quite a bit now, where it's basically, here's an item, now, show me what it looks like in this room, on the ground, in my car. Very, very cool stuff where you can kind of start to visualize what that particular item would look like in a given scenario. So when we think about mobile from the standpoint of putting together a technical project, one thing that I think would be helpful to talk through, what are the considerations? You're a principal engineer, architect level thinker in the mobile space. What would push an organization to develop, direct native, Swift, iOS, Kotlin on Android, as opposed to, some of the right once deploy in both platforms like Flutter. There's quite a few out there that Maui. There's others that are kind of that right once deploy to both. What do you look at when you're kind of making those decisions architecturally within the mobile space?
So the big things I like to look at is obviously, what is the project? What is it? What's your success for your project? What are you looking to build? So by understanding that, then I'll be able to determine, is this something that we need to stick to natively on the devices? Or can we go with, one of those other platforms? Flutter, Microsoft Maui, Kotlin has some stuff that you can use too as well. So for me, what I like to do is look at how the device is going to be used. So if it's something that you need really tight integration, it needs to work with other devices. A lot of times I'll probably stick to native. If it's a device that, uses a lot of back-end services, maybe doesn't require a lot of the capabilities of the phone, then I'll look at those other platforms to use that.
Very cool. And then from a skill set standpoint, what are the considerations from a, language programming skill set in those different scenarios? I mean, kind of talk through what considerations need to be thought through.
Yeah, so depending on if you go native or if you use the platform, obviously you want people with experience that have used those platforms or native languages. The one thing I really strive to understand is native. You're always going to have success there if you go that route. That allows you to build great applications. You can use a lot of the latest and greatest features that those languages provide. The platforms, sometimes you have to wait until those platforms have upgraded to use those latest and greatest from the native side. Some other problems that I do as I'm looking to build a team, as I'm trying to understand their capabilities, I also like to look to see if they even have experience with even the native languages. Because, for example, if you're using Flutter and you're, deep in the bowels of the project, and you come across errors that are specific. For example, if they're specific to iOS or even Android, you have to understand the native portion as well. And so by having that experience and understanding that, you'll be able to work a little bit better in those platform-specific languages like Flutter. Not languages, but in those platforms like Flutter or Maui. You get you will definitely have an opportunity to understand and be able to troubleshoot the issues that you run into.
Very cool. So what else? What else would you add in the context of a mobile project that should be considered, thought about? What I mean, you've had a ton of experience in this space. What else would you add there?
Yeah, so a lot of times I look at just the overall project, the mobile application. When we say, hey, we're going to build a mobile application, a lot of times there is some type of infrastructure back end that you need to build out or you need to leverage. So defining that or understanding what that is will probably have a bearing on your, however your mobile project will go. So by understanding that, you'll be able to move forward with that and determining, how you're going to build your team out, what skill sets you need. Obviously, you could probably leverage some, some capabilities, some experience from that team too as well. So for example, you can have Android and iOS developers that might be able to help in the back end if you need that. There might be opportunities where they can help with front-end development too as well, if there's a web component to it. If you know what you're building, you'll be able to leverage your team to help you in many different areas, not just focusing solely on mobile. Sometimes in some of the other projects that we do or that we've done in the past, we also look to see where we can utilize people in other areas of the project too as well. So for example, it might not always be development. For example, you might have people that are very skilled in mobile development, but also know how to manage other developers. So you might leverage them in that way as well.
Very cool. It's interesting. The mobile projects I've been a part of almost always have some, web component. And in many cases, the whole notion of building the functionality for a mobile device happens after the fact. The project I mentioned a minute ago that we're doing right now at STG, where it is essentially a mobile-only offering, is kind of unique, and it's given us the ability to kind of think through, what that experience is going to be like, where we're taking a mobile-first mindset. Talk through some of your experience where you've seen that, both directions, where you essentially have functionality built on the web and you're trying to replicate some or all of that on mobile, as opposed to taking a mobile-first mindset. Is, pros and cons. I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, great question. Pros and cons. So in the past, I think probably recently in the last couple of years, probably the last 5 or 6 years, we're seeing a lot of that mentality of, hey, let's take that mobile first mindset. And so you get a lot of great designs that are specifically around mobile. That's been wonderful. I mean, that's huge. I love that when we think about mobile, obviously first. In the past, I've been around where it's always been an afterthought, a second thought, like, hey, we should do a mobile application. So no thought's been put into it. It's very difficult. You always run into problems all the time. It's the cost can skyrocket. So I always strive to say, if I'm doing a web, hey, do we need to do mobile, and let's rethink this and, approach it that way. Now on some of them, I do, look at it and say, hey, we're doing mobile. Do we need to do web too as well? And then take that opportunity to really think through that. Some of the things that we're starting to see with UX and UI is that we're taking that mobile first approach, and so a lot of the designs are focused on both mobile and web. The one thing I will say, maybe a con, is that For the mobile platforms, you do see a lot of rich, for example, you might see more iOS designs versus Android designs. Sometimes it might be the reverse. So one of the problems that we run into is that even though we're doing mobile first, sometimes we might not focus on both platforms at the same time, and one might now become an afterthought too as well. So putting that first into the project planning, understanding like, hey, we might want to do both platforms, or we might want to focus on one versus the other. So having that knowledge up front of how you're going to accomplish that or what you want to accomplish first, that's a very good thing to have in place before you even start the project. And a lot of times I'll come and I'll ask the question like, who is your target audience and what platform are they using? So for example, if you're reaching out into the world, it might be, hey, we need to focus on Android first versus, hey, we're only going to stay in the US. So maybe we might want to focus on iOS first and then come back and do Android later.
Yeah. And I love that perspective, what you just said. Most people know this, but for those who don't, I mean, the US has a pretty strong bias toward iPhone. I think it's right now at about 50% market share, and then Android picks up about 30%, and then all the rest, the remaining. Whereas internationally, it's dominant Android. Africa, South America, Central America, it is really remarkable how much more Android has market share wise worldwide. And so that's what we've done in the past is, typically if it's international, we start with Android. If it's US based, we start with iOS. And what I've seen happen is we'll typically create within the development team a structure where one of them, iOS or Android, is 1 to 2 iterations behind the other. That way we can essentially cut our teeth with the designs. Let's say that the iOS is the dominant position from a development standpoint. They're the ones working with the designers, working with the analysts, making sure they got the requirements set correctly. They develop first, and then 2 iterations later, the Android team picks it up. And I've seen it the other way as well, where the Android team may be first because it's an international-based product. But it's rare that if we're going to develop native, that they would develop the same functionality at the same time. At least that's been my experience. Have you seen similar or?
Yeah, to some degree, yes. Some degrees, for example, some teams I've seen where they do them at the same time. Some will lead forward faster than others, just depending on priorities and resources that are available. For example, iOS might not be ready and Android is. So you might, lead the way in Android. So it just really depends, on the team, on the project, on the dynamics of the team, who's available, who's not available, priorities too, for example. Like you said, you might do a feature or something. For example, you might just say, hey, we have resources. We're just going to start it on Android first, because we have someone that's free versus, does it make sense to do it or not do it based on, our deployment? Are we going national or are we staying here in the States? So
very good. Well, one question that continues to come up, at least I hear it, I would say at least every few months, is the question of, do we build a responsive web app that is mobile friendly, or do we build an actual iOS, Android app? So take out the equation of, Swift, Kotlin, Flutter, all that. Basically, are we going to develop something that is an actual app for the phone, or do we build it using, responsive, design principles? What are the trends you're seeing in that space?
Yeah, we're starting to see some of it. I guess it depends. I guess it depends on cost and the project and, how intensive is the project. If it's a simple application, obviously you can get away and maybe that's your MVP, your first iteration of the project. You go down that path. We are starting to see the progressive web apps are starting to be reduced in nature. But again, it depends on who you're talking to, depends on, who's using the apps. But I've always focused on, if we can do native, if we can start out, let's do native first. That's going to give a richer user experience. Overall, when we look at even the software development lifecycle, CI/CD pipelines, we can usually build all that out pretty quickly, and then that's just something that we just maintain at that point. So it's easier to maintain in my opinion, and it allows you to continue to upgrade the application over years. What I'm finding is that as people create applications, especially on the business side, those applications remain for years, and then the upgrade paths are very, very difficult with using something like, for example, if you use PhoneGap or progressive web apps, those might be harder to maintain and upgrade year over year over year, especially if you're not doing it.
Yeah, and that's been my experience as well. I mean, some people may know that you can take a responsive web app and create essentially an icon on your phone, but instructing people on how to do that, it's not intuitive for most people, and so the situations that I've seen, I would say almost just off the cuff, 60-70% of the time when the decision is made to go responsive, usually within a few years, they pull back that decision and end up actually building an app, just because of the things you said, the user frustration. People will say, "Gosh, I went to the app store, I couldn't find your app," and then the support people are in this place of, "Well, it's not there, but it is mobile friendly, and if you just type in this URL and make your icon," and immediately after 2 or 3 instructions, people are just like, "What?" They're confused and not really sure of what that means, because people who are not technical, the moment that you kind of say, "Well, you got to type in this URL in your phone's browser," and then either create an icon or just bookmark it, people are just like, "I'm out." This is not the experience I want. And of course, Apple, Android, they're pretty smart with the App Store and the Google Play Store. They that's kind of their ecosystem. So they know that experience of having an actual app is far richer, far better in most situations than a responsive app. And so it's one of those situations where you got to really think through, like you said, once you start to make that investment, it's long term. And so you got to think through, what is this going to look like 3 years from now, 5 years from now? Yeah. And the amount of money we're investing in the functionality, is that the kind of experience we really want? And in some cases, responsive web apps are fine, totally fine.
Yeah.
But if you're going to a mass audience where the expectation is download the app from the App Store, Google Play Store, you're going to want to have an actual app that's installed on the phone.
Yeah, and I think that's where I agree with everything that you said. In addition to that, what I would also say is that does open up the door to some of these other platforms, like Flutter or Kotlin has some, or Maui.
Mm-hmm.
Those allow you now to actually create applications that can be deployed on both, Android, iOS. Some even support some other ones as well. But at least you get that core of Android and iOS, and you can deploy those. That, in my mind, might be a better alternative versus doing, say, something like a progressive web app. Now, with that being said, there's obviously some pros and cons with that too as well. But if you factor into when you have a mobile project that you want to accomplish, those are the questions that I like to ask is, okay, how long do you want this to be around? And then, do we need to tack on a couple extra years? Because it does seem like that if someone says, for example, hey, we want to have this around for 3 years, it usually goes a lot longer than that.
A lot longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, the typical lifespan of any type of system like that is easily 5 at minimum.
Yeah.
And usually much longer, much longer than that. So, well, good. I don't have any other questions. Do you have anything else you want to add as we wrap up?
The last thing I would say, again, is as you're thinking about the projects that you're doing, take the time to really sit down and flush those projects out. I feel that with mobile applications, we're at that point now where there's so many benefits, there's so many things out there that you should look at all that and take advantage of that and really plan it out, instead of in the past where people would say, oh, and let's do a mobile application. I think now is the time to really take advantage of that, especially with a lot of the new features that are coming out. And I'm pretty sure most people have a mobile device accessible. So you have target audiences everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Ray, thank you. We really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it, Mel.
We hope you found value in today's webinar. If you wish to delve deeper into how STG can contribute to the innovation and optimization of your organization, please visit our website at stgconsulting.com for more information. Thank you for being with us today. We wish you a fantastic day ahead.